Great. So we have arrived at the last section of our webinar, which is about UIs and how you can build reporting UIs. So I'm going to show you a template, basically, that you can use to create simple reports and also some simple interaction with the ledger. This is really meant to be sort of a bit of boilerplate code that saves you writing some of the more infrastructure related stuff. So it's a template for a React application, a JavaScript React application. And it has the most basic functionality of displaying contracts that are on the ledger in a tabular format, and then providing ways to exercise choices on these contracts. So I'm first going to show you sort of the UI itself and how it looks, and then we'll go into how it's built and how you can modify it. So it presents you with a very simple login screen where you can log in as a party, and you'll have to configure those parties. So I'm going to log in as Alice. And just to mention, I've beforehand here started up a sandbox and the JSON API, so same as Luciana has just shown. And I've ran a modified version of the Python script that just populates a couple of contracts on the ledger so that we have actually something to look at. Yeah, so and before I start to actually log in, I'll have to start up the UI. So that's, I'm now in this UI subdirectory of the Hello CDM example. And you would usually do a yarn install first. And after that, you can simply do a yarn start. That assumes that you have the yarn tool installed, and you can. There's a link in our README to how you can download and install that tool. Just to mention, if you're not familiar with JavaScript or React, this might all be sort of a bit complex at first. But I'll try to point out the parts which you can take and modify even without sort of deep knowledge of either of the two. So let's start for the server to come up. All right, that seems to have worked. So now let's log in as Alice. And what you see here is a very basic screen. It shows the user that I'm logged into. I can log out again, and it has these two tabs. The first one is kind of a default contract view. It just shows you the module of the contract, the template that we're showing, the contract ID, and then it has this JSON, explorable JSON tree where you can drill down and actually look at the data that's on the contract. So that's useful when you just want to explore arbitrary contracts. It will show all types of contract and have this generic explorer here. On the second tab, which I've called report here, you can see that we're displaying some more detailed information here. So it's the same set of contracts where we're pulling out specific fields to display in the various columns. So here, for example, we display the identifier that was already mentioned by my colleagues, and the version. We display the payment amount, currency, payer, and the receiver. What you can also see here is a very simplistic way to exercise this say hello choice. So it just has an input form here where you can type in the greeting you want to use. So you can say, for example, hello world. And what you've noticed here, once I press return, this would actually have exercised the choice and then queried the contracts again from the ledger, which you can see down here, where the updated contract is shown. So it got a new contract ID, it's got the modified identifier, and the version is increased by 1. So yeah, this would allow you, for example, if you have a classical propose accept pattern then you could put the acceptance here and let people interact with the ledger that way. That's really all that sort of we provide here up front. There is a bit of boilerplate code behind that, but I think you can see how this allows you to start modifying that template to your needs, add new reports and different ways of interaction. Okay, so let's look at the code that's required to build it. So as mentioned, you can find this all of this in the UI subfolder of the repository that we link to. And the first thing that I want to show you is the configuration file. That's where you have to specify the parties that you allow to log in. So there's no security around this. It's really meant as a development type of UI. You simply list the parties that you want to make available here, and it will generate the JWT tokens automatically, the ones that you've seen in the Python program before. And one side note that once you want to work against a deployed version of your Double model, so against the cloud hosted Double, you will be provided with those access tokens via the Double homepage, so you will need to copy them in here for this to work. Okay, so first of all, how do we get the data out of the ledger and into our React application? We're using here something called React contexts, which is a way to provide sort of global information to your different components. And the implementation of that is not really relevant for you, as you probably don't need to modify it. But what it essentially does is it provides you with a ledger state that you can then use in your components and in the reports that you create. It also provides these two essential functions. One is to send commands to the ledger, and you can see the 4 relevant lines here, which basically build up the request with the correct authorization header, and then issue this post request to the command endpoint. Now this is plain JavaScript using the fetch API that's available in most browsers. So if you were to decide for a completely different UI framework or so, or just want to do plain HTML JavaScript, you can still use these lines as a way to send commands to the ledger. In the same way, there's a function to fetch contracts from the ledger. And here you can see we just checked that there's a token available. And then again, these 3 lines, plain JavaScript, are what you need to fetch the data. So these could be also used in different contexts. What it does here is basically it reads out the individual contracts and then dispatches this action that updates the state, so the context that we're passing around to all of our components. The next thing I want to show is the generic contracts component. So that's a component that you can use in your custom reports or extend with more features. So that component is one that you can instantiate with a list of contracts, and optionally with some columns and actions along with it. And the implementation here is probably also not so much of relevance. Essentially what it does, it builds up a table using these contracts down here, and then adds, depending whether you have specified custom columns or whether you specified actions, it would add columns with buttons as well. But in the simplest possible case, when you just provide it with some data, so with some contracts here and don't provide anything, that will result in the default view that I've showed you earlier. And you can see this in the default implementation, which is actually now trivial. So what you do here is you get the ledger state using the use ledger state function, and then there is a helper function also defined in this module that lets you basically filter your contracts by a given module name and template name. So that will give me all the transfers, and then I simply pass the transfers into this contracts component, and it will result in the default view where we have this generic Explorer component. Now, as I've mentioned, we can sort of customize this contracts view, and that's what's done in the report page. So what we do here is a tiny bit more complex. We still get our ledger state here, and we still get all the transfers, and we pass them into the contracts component. But what we specify additionally is the columns that we want to display. And this takes a somewhat generic format that we say, this is the column name, and this is the field that I want to pull out of the contract. And here we support this sort of combined path expression, where you simply say, I want to get this field, then this. So you can go into deeply nested structures. You can even go into array elements here until you finally find the value that you want. And that's just to simplify working with sort of the highly nested CDM data structures. As you can see, these expressions are quite long, but what it ultimately allows you to do is have this nice, concise view of fields that are deep within a CDM message. And then in addition to that, you can, if you want to have some form of interaction on the contracts in the table, you can add this actions array, where basically you say, I want to support this action, let's say hello action. When the user clicks it, I want to call this function, and this function is defined up here. And this is a way to say, I want to have an additional parameter to that choice called whom to greet, which will get passed into the exercise choice function. So the exercise choice function will then be called with the contract. So the line, basically the contract in the line that you click the button, and with the argument that the user entered. Now the additional argument here is optional. So if you just want to have a button that, for example, exercises a choice that doesn't take any parameter, for example, in an accept choice on a proposal, you could just leave that out, and you wouldn't get the text field for additional input. And here in the exercise choice function, all I really do is I build up my command object, specifying the template ID, contract ID that I want to exercise the choice on, the choice name, the argument, which has a single parameter here, whom to greet. So that really corresponds to the parameter of the choice that you've seen in demo. And then I specify this time parameter, which you don't need to be concerned of. What I then do is I send the command, and I wait until the command is accepted, and I immediately refetch the contracts, which is what makes this look sort of very responsive. So if I type in something, then you'll notice it immediately gets updated because we refetch the contracts. Of course, if you want to do anything else, when a user clicks a button, for example, you could think about navigating to a detailed view of that particular contract. You can do that as well. There's no reason why this function couldn't do anything else than exercising a choice. It will always get passed in the contract information so that you have that available with whatever you want to do. All right, what's left to say? If you want to now extend this application, there is a couple of ways. For example, you might want to add new new tabs here. For this, you would want to look into the sidebar component. It simply has a list of the sidebar link. And as you can see, you specify the label to display and then the path where you want it to navigate. And you'll have to make sure that under this path, you'll have a page, a corresponding page here defined. And then this will just work. Similarly, you could think about extending the header. So that's basically the part on top of here. Currently, we just have the logout button, and we have a button that will refresh your contracts from the ledger if you want to do that sort of on demand. And you could add additional buttons here, anything really that you want. You would simply add it to the list of components here. So for example, here you have the refresh button, which calls fetch contracts, or the sign out button, which signs out the user. Great, so that's really all I wanted to show. It's the relevant parts of the JavaScript project. And as mentioned, for simple things, it should be enough to sort of take the example and modify it accordingly. If you're not familiar with JavaScript at all, we do have another example in the repository that that shows you how you can also use Python notebooks, in case you're familiar with that, and build reports via that. So that's more for users that would rather use Python. Yeah, and otherwise, let us know if there are any questions around that. Have there been any questions in the?
I think they're all answered. So I don't think we have any outstanding questions at the moment. I just want to check with our guys our hosts in New York. Are we okay to talk a bit more? Do we need to stop the recording?
We have a couple more minutes. We'll close this out.
Okay, I saw a question there that I think Levent answered. Is that something you would like to share?
The applicability of DAML to B2B use cases to more like business to client use cases. And I commented that obviously, for the CDM hackathon and ISDA and Barclays, this is all going to be B2B. However, tools like Dabble are definitely meant to address both of those use cases. So particularly where parties might be individual users rather than entities or desks.
Okay, I'll also repeat one question that I answered earlier. The question was, can we integrate Java applications with a ledger? And if you go to our official documentation website, you'll see that we do provide a Java API. However, for this particular event, we're not supporting that because it's not something we can host on the in our cloud platform. So I think that's it. I don't know if our hosts in New York want to make a final announcement, maybe about the next event before we close.
Yeah, before that, maybe just wanted to briefly make some closing remarks. So just as a sort of a quick guidance for the hackathon itself, I think as a team, what you should try to do is really showcase sort of the DAML and the DLT features that you're working out in your solution. So the privacy aspects, the aspects of having also the right authorization on your contracts. This is often not easy to show on a report itself. So you might want to think about showing some code or so. The second thing is, try to differentiate yourself. You can imagine if all the DAML teams now basically show the exact same reporting UI that I've just shown. You might not stick out from the crowd. So try to be creative and do something new. I would also sort of strongly advise you to solve the first couple of use cases that you get up front, that you solve them before the hackathon, or at least try and do that and look at them. The hackathon itself is very sort of aggressive in terms of the timelines, so you'll get under time pressure if you sort of come in blank and haven't looked at those. Yeah, and just if there are any questions in your preparation or once you start working with these use cases, do reach out to us on Slack. We'll try to be responsive there and help you in any way needed. So with that, I think we can close the call. Thank you all for participating, and wish you good luck for the hackathon, and join us next week for the last session on Double, which is on the 9th of October. Thanks.